Hi everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Buller Show. Today I have with me Andrew Bartlow. Now, a little bit about Andrew. He's had 25 years experience in human resources and talent management and has worked with many high growth companies. And we're going to talk today a lot about high growth businesses. He's worked with companies across the whole spectrum, from scaling to getting acquired and to going public. He is the CEO and founder of Series B Consulting. And has worked in companies like Waypoint Homes that went from a tech startup to now $14 billion public company. We're going to have a look at how to scale for success and how to prioritize that in a high growth organization. So welcome to the show, Andrew. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here from San Francisco.
Thank you. Really great to be here.
So, Andrew, how did you get into the area of HR, because that's sort of your specialty area? What did you have an aha moment at the end of high school and going, I want to be in HR? What happened there?
Yeah, boy, so many people fall into it, right? So many people are office managers or recruiters and, kind of stumble their way into human resources. Me, I figured it out early, which was uncommon. I found my way in through a formative experience. Yeah, high school. There was an organized labor strike. Caterpillar and the United Auto Workers.
Right.
CAT was, Dow component headquartered in my hometown of East Peoria, Illinois. They had a 3-year labor strike when I was in high school.
Wow.
And it was a front page of the Peoria Journal Star every day for 3 years, talking about the union management relationship. And so I learned about a labor negotiator. I learned about the impact that function, which was part of human resources, could have on a company, a community, all of its workers. And, so I looked at law school, got into Cornell and Northwestern, took a bunch of negotiations classes, and found that just down the road, University of Illinois had the top labor and employment relations program in the world. Hour and a half down the road. So ended up going there on full ride for grad school and never really looked back.
Okay. So what was your first gig that when you left, did you do any internships that
I was fortunate, like great program, lots of company interest. It was a hot market in the mid 90s as I was completing my grad school program. I had an internship before I started, had an internship during it. One with Cummins engine, one with General Mills up in Minneapolis, and ended up taking on a full-time job with Pepsi. And Pepsi at the time was known as the top human resources function in the world. So, great opportunity to go to school at the top program and then go to one of those big academy programs that's really well known for doing what I did. It was like Procter and Gamble is known for marketing. Pepsi was known for HR.
All right. So how long were you there for at Pepsi?
Yeah, I was there, maybe 4 years, 3 or 4 years, something like that. Had probably 4 or 5 jobs during that time. It was amazing. That's part of why they're so well known for the function, because they move people around and you get accelerated experience. I ended up jumping out relatively early, because it was in the midst of the dot-com boom and later bust. So at 23 years old, I had the opportunity to become head of HR for a startup that we took international and funded by KKR. Partners founded it from McKinsey and Deloitte. So, that was my first startup experience, was 99 or 2000.
Right. So how did that turn out? Was that
Well, yeah, like so many other startups did during the dot-com boom and bust. Most of our clients were in the tech space, and they busted, and they went belly up, and so did we. We grew from 20 people to 120 people, and then down to 0. I laid everybody off, and then laid myself off, and
right.
went flew back to quality and took a job at General Electric in Chicago.
Right. And I think you've been in a range of HR roles for quite a while then, didn't you?
Yeah. I've worked at a couple of the big companies that I just named, other places that you would have heard of, from Fortune 50 to less than 50 employees, from startups to the mega caps, over the 20 something years.
Yeah. There's one part in your career that I found interesting. I don't know if it is, but because we'll dig a little bit into it. But you said you were head of HR for Waypoint Homes, which is a real estate tech startup.
Yeah.
So, real estate tech startup, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, it means you're pitching to the investors that you're a tech company and you're looking for that multiple on your valuation, but you're really tech enabled.
Right. Okay.
So they didn't have anything, truly proprietary, but there was this convergence of technology and opportunity doing what they did that was a secret sauce. So
Hmm.
their business started out as Waypoint, had some private equity backers, Starwood, known for the hotels, and Barry Sternlicht, famous billionaire out here in New York real estate, and then Colony North Star got involved as well. So the name kept changing. It was Colony Starwood, it was Starwood Waypoint. Eventually, it became what's now known as Invitation Homes, headquartered out of Dallas.
Right.
And they own. We took. I think when I was there, they owned about 5,000 single family houses, and they would buy them, usually at distressed prices, fix them up, rent them out, and manage them and maintain them.
Right.
They were a REIT, real estate investment trust, and now they own almost 100,000 homes
Wow.
across the United States. The largest institutional single family homeowner. And what was unique for them was nobody could figure out how to manage all those rooftops.
Mm.
Apartment buildings you can handle. You've got high mass. You have a maintenance person. You have a leasing person. You generally know what they're doing. But the scale of all those rooftops and all the drive time only became enabled by cloud computing and mobile technology. And we did a lot of stuff on the Salesforce platform and made it work. And boy, really made a go of it. Company was wildly successful, and I credit them for having a great idea and making it happen. And I rode the rocket ship. I was the head of HR as they went public, and then carried them through several mergers and acquisitions.
Wow. Yeah, the management of that many, what you say, rooftops. A lot of companies go and do own apartment blocks or renovate them and then manage them, but doing it single homes, that's property management's not an easy thing. You're dealing with people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's absolutely
Mm.
true, and you definitely get some headwinds from the various legislative groups, and landlords tend not to be really well thought of. There's lots of tenants' rights advocacy, and the Occupy Wall Street movement was a few years behind us, but I really thought that they were doing something good, providing a higher quality product than the mom and pop single landlord owners would do.
Yeah, it's an interesting area, and I've actually talked to a couple of American business owners that are in the real estate business, and what was interesting was their strategy. And it's a little different to Australia because we tend to be a little bit more homogenous, whereas the Americans use a term called red states and blue states.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we know what they are. And some of the investors, one of their major strategies is only to invest in red states. You live in San Francisco, which is a blue state, I believe, as an Australian.
It's as blue as it gets here in the Bay. Yeah.
But it's just really interesting to see that strategy emerge from a political, cultural environment in terms of real estate investing. And
Yeah.
did Waypoint play across the spectrum of the red and blue?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't politically driven, but they built a buy box so that that was something that was proprietary, an acquisition engine that helped them figure out where to buy and at what price.
Right.
So it had to do with factors that you might be able to find on Zillow today. what's the crime rate, what's the economy in the local area, what's the job growth, transportation, pollution, hospitals, the historical um, uh, price increases in the marketplace. So
Mm.
all of these various factors about livability and
Mm.
likelihood that population will increase and people will want to be there, tends to be there tends to be a correlation to the lower tax areas, the warm weather, low
Mm.
tax areas, which many of those are red states, but not all of them. Texas, of course, is getting tons of attention with zero state income tax, and
Yep.
um, but the company that I had such a great ride with, originally called Waypoint, was started in the Bay Area.
Right.
So an improbable beginning location,
Mm.
but a lot of success nationally.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that they use proprietary technology to actually almost do a checklist to see what was a good area to buy in. But now we're in the middle of enormous change, which I'm sure you're experiencing as well. Well, it's happening globally. And you mentioned in our little in our chat before was that the San Francisco city is basically a bit of a ghost town, and people have fled to the suburbs and to the regions, and that's happening here as well. So, and that produces some fascinating sort of dynamics, doesn't it, in terms of how do you manage people remotely, and how do you scale growth, which is what you specialise in. So let's we've gone a little bit off topic here, but let's instead of but how did you get into high growth? In other words, your book is called Scaling for Success: People Priorities for High Growth Organisations. And you're also the founder of Series B Consulting, which helps people scale their businesses quickly. What got you into that sort of scaling for success and high growth businesses?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was where I'm located here in the Bay Area. This is this is the cradle of startup culture in Silicon Valley and San Francisco Bay. There's so many organizations being started and finding great success and growing quickly. And really, it's the convergence here of that high growth environment that I'm a part of and have been a part of now for 15 years or so, living in the Bay, and the human resources management of those organizations. So I bring with me the academy experience of the great master's education and the great Pepsi and GE and what good looks like. That frankly, there's been a lot of hubris within the startup community of, hey, if it's not the big name tech, if Google didn't do it, we don't care.
Mm.
If Wells Fargo did it, we want to do the opposite because we don't want to be like those big, stodgy, old, slow, bureaucratic companies.
Yep.
And I saw a miss there. I saw a gap
Yep.
where the avoidance of some tried and true practices that could really help some small companies, they were thumbing their noses at it. And
Yeah.
so I was trying to bring, I was trying to elevate some of the management practices at these high growth companies
Yeah.
that, thought I could help.
Yeah. In some of the notes that I had a look at, which you sent through to me, one of the things that was mentioned was content versus context, and why startups shouldn't model Google-like companies. And you mentioned some of that. There's tried and proven principles that have been shown to work.
Right.
And I suppose you're going, look, you might be a startup, and the hubris of going, I'm a startup, so I don't need to follow the old rules because they don't matter anymore. But the reality is that some of the old rules and processes and frameworks still, they work, and that's the reason why they have been adopted. So can you tell us why, what does content versus context mean? Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, bottom line, there's no such thing as a best practice. It all depends. It all depends on your own context. So whatever worked for Google worked for them in the moment at that time. Whatever works for Facebook works for them in the moment at that time. And we won't really know if it worked until we get the benefit of hindsight, frankly. And so I suggest that there's a real risk to taking the content of somebody else's idea and lifting and shifting it into your context without applying some critical thinking.
Right.
So don't throw out the ideas of the old economy, big successful companies without at least considering it. And likewise, don't just apply the practices of some big successful company down the road that is for whatever reason more interesting or has some best practice. Zappos is a great example how they rolled out a bunch of creative management principles and practices that may have worked for them in certain contexts, but deserve some real critical thinking before applying them more broadly. So that's the general idea. There's no such thing as a best practice. There should be critical thinking applied to whatever you decide to do in terms of operating your organization.
Yeah. So there's one thing that I've noticed recently that a lot of companies are, and as we know, to grow a business fast, you need to be documenting the processes. So because if you're going to scale, you need to know what your processes are, and everyone needs to know what they are. But for a small company, they quite often don't have the resources to document their processes.
Well, those processes are probably changing every 10 minutes too, as your business changes and evolves.
Yeah. But eventually, and this is a challenge. I'm not a big company. I've got a few staff. Global virtual team. We are essentially a remote business. I designed it that way so I could actually have some fun, travel, and still get work done. But still, routine matters and processes matter. So I discovered a tool recently, which is I think comes out of Atlassian, which is an Australian company, called Confluence, which is about documenting. And I went, okay, I do need to document what we do. So we do it, but I'm going, we could spend all our time documenting and not get anything else done. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on the whole documenting processes, because you're about fast growth, and fast growth requires certain structures and it needs good processes. So I'd be interested in what your thoughts are on documenting company processes and when should you do it?
Yeah. Well, and I might make somewhat of a tweak to being about fast growth. I'm about effective growth. I'm about growth that's sustainable. And so a lot of that is driven by your operating practices and how you choose to manage and run your org. And boy, I keep turning back to the Marshall Goldsmith chestnut of what got you here won't get you there.
Yep.
And I hear all the time from founders and CEOs that I work with, how can you help us keep our culture? I feel like we're losing our culture. And I say, good. That means you're growing. That means things are changing, things are evolving. And so you might want to be keeping some things the same, but be really selective about what those things are. And yes, that dirty word of process and structure, that'll start to ramp up, and it should, so that you can keep your organization aligned. And so documenting some things, delegating work, moving from generalists to specialists, it really changes your culture, and it changes how your organization operates from when you're 5 to 25 to 125 and beyond people that work with your organization. It should be changing. And that balance between generalist and specialist and figure it out on the fly versus plan it out and document it and try to get a little bit more rigor, that balance should be shifting.
Yeah, because I love the statement, what got you here won't get you to the next level, sort of paradigm. So let's dive into a little bit more about maybe the structure for your book, Scaling for Success. Is there like 5 pillars, 7 pillars? Is there steps? You also run an accelerator program for startups globally, where you essentially almost coach CEOs. Is that correct?
It's actually, thanks for the opportunity to pitch it. People Leader Accelerator is the program that I run with a couple of partners, including a PhD in organizational behavior and entrepreneurship, and that's a That's a program that supports HR leaders at startups. So we haven't put any CEOs through it, but we've had some requests. And we've had some requests from venture capital partners as well. But we're pretty tightly focused on those HR leaders. So those organizations already have enough scale to hire somebody that's a head of HR.
Right.
Yeah. So the key pillars, I think there are probably three. And we've already talked about one. One is context over content. And so again, there's no such thing as a best practice. Be really cautious about lifting and shifting. Don't just try to keep up with the Joneses. I have all sorts of snappy sayings around this one.
Okay.
Yeah, a second pillar would be have a plan. Full stop. Have a plan, and then expect that plan to evolve. A little bit more on this. As I work with startup leaders, I find that there's this real reluctance to committing to a plan, to a goal, to what are the three things that are most important to us right now. There's this fear that if we say this or we write it down and we don't make it, then our employees will quit and our investors will stop and will stop bringing capital to us. And I'm the founder CEO and I'll be taken out. And there's a lot of fear, which is at odds with leaders that want to know what all their people are working on all the time, that want to have a wildly successful organization with super highly productive people. But how are they supposed to know what they should be working on if you don't have clarity at the top? So start with a plan. Don't let ambiguity and change get in the way or be your excuse not to have a plan. Start there. We can talk more about that. And then I think the last pillar, and these are in no particular order, is master only the basics. It's really easy to get distracted by bright, shiny objects and novel practices in startup land, or you read an HBR article, or you attend a investor meeting with other CEOs, or somebody's doing something cool and you want to do it too. Or somebody on your team, says, can't we do what so-and-so did at Atlassian or at my last company or what have you? And I really encourage, particularly startups that are in high growth, high change, high stress environments with limited resources, you got to make some choices. You got to ruthlessly prioritize. And so you might have a novel product or a novel service, but you don't need to create your own wheel with how to manage and run your organization. Get those basics right, be really good at the fundamentals, and then you can be selective about a couple of interesting things, but don't try to do everything new and novel.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct. Last year I launched the podcast, and I didn't try to do everything. I said, okay, let's just get the audio right and do transcripts. Then we launched the YouTube channel, and now we're optimizing blog posts along with the transcripts. And the team, we have a good process. So I record, I upload, and the guys take it from there. So the process, and so it's good. I'm the talking head. I have a chat, and then the team looks after the rest. And this year we're just going to launch a new product. We're aiming at October. And you're right. Don't try and do too many things. I think especially entrepreneurs can love ideas, but you can have a lot of ideas that get you distracted and chase shiny new objects. And for me, it also happened in the social media world. Like I was quite big on Twitter, and then I was on Facebook, and then Pinterest showed up, and Instagram showed up, and Facebook Messenger showed up, and then Snapchat showed up. And I got to the point when I can't be on this many platforms. Well, do them well. So I think a minimal viable product is really, really important. And you know what? You don't even know if it's going to work. So you don't want to sort of put all your resources into that and realize that, hey, this is. And I've seen so many startups launch a product and they're going, no one wants it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's the classic challenge where the visionary driver founder is the animal spirit behind creating this company and getting its first customers and making it happen, building the thing, selling the thing. And then you find some measure of success and you get funding and you start to grow. And some of those things that helped you be successful start to get in your way. The creativity and the visionary and the driving aspects of that classic entrepreneurial personality start to become at odds as the pirates become the Navy, as the barbarians become bureaucrats. And it doesn't happen overnight. But as you started talking about documenting processes to enable you to scale, that's the sort of thing that feels real itchy to a lot of entrepreneurs and startups. It's like, oh, I don't want to do that. Yeah. Why do we have to do that? Tim knows how to do it. Just, Tim will do it. But then you have 15, Tims and Tinas and, everybody else all over the world that are trying to do this thing. They might need to know how to do it. So your approach should change, and it's hard for the classic entrepreneurial profile to make that shift. Yeah.
And I think you've got to realize as an entrepreneur what you're not good at as well as what you're good at. And delegation becomes really, really important, and letting go. And that allows you to scale, because there's a few ways to scale yourself. Number one is hire a good team. They become, many arms and legs that help you scale. Processes help you scale. Technology helps you scale. So you can scale your time. You just got to hire people to help you do it.
That's right. Well, and the sequencing of those hires can be important and can be telling.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I write about, where as you start to build a team, are you hiring the doers or are you hiring the designers first? Do you hire a department head, or do you hire the team that will do that work? And ideally, I think you look for the player coach, the person who has led others before, who can lead a team, but is willing to roll their sleeves up and go do it. That tends to be a lot more effective than the ivory tower person who's only done it at a very high level and doesn't really want to get their hands dirty.
Yeah.
And a lot more effective than the superstar individual contributor that can code their way to the moon, but can't build and lead a team.
Yeah, they can't manage a team. Yeah.
Yeah. So that player coach profile, as rare as it is, those purple unicorns that are running around somewhere, they're incredibly valuable in the growth stages of a startup.
So tell us a little bit what sort of person you see as a player coach profile. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I would just emphasize some of the things I just talked about. Somebody that's already managed a team that isn't being asked to do it for the first time. Somebody that has some measure of been there, done that in their experience, but is still willing and clearly signs up for doing the work.
Yeah.
That's the player part of it. And the coach is, somebody that has coached, that can coach, that can have a foot in both worlds.
I think it's good, rather than just hiring a low paying, person to do just the nuts and bolts. You need someone who can basically run a mini division, if you want to call it that, and has done it for someone else, so they know where all the pitfalls are already. They maybe played on the field and also stepped off the field and became a coach. And I think that what you described as player coach is a great way to describe it. So let's dive a little bit into the other thing that you've mentioned in your book, is how to prioritize in high growth organizations. So you're growing and then you go, my God, it's just overwhelming. What are my priorities? So how do you manage that? It's like, do I hire someone to sell because I'm doing the selling, I don't want to do it anymore? That can turn into disaster. Or do I need someone that can launch a project for me, but I need to give them a plan? You might find that I need your tech suffering, you maybe outsource that, but now it's time to hire a head tech guy that maybe can code, but he also can manage a team. So how do you prioritize when you've got all this noise?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the clearest, most succinct answer is it depends. It depends what's important for your organization at
Yeah.
that moment. Is it product, engineering, sales, what have you? It depends. So the
Context.
framework that I talked, what's that?
Context.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And heck, if I were to give you a straight answer on that, I would hope that you would, throw a red flag and say, why? You're trying to sell me something. It depends. It really does depend. But the framework that you can approach that problem with is what's most important right now? What are my few critical priorities? I want to hire player coaches that can help me build this specialty function, some specialists, people that I can trust, that I don't need to look over their shoulder all the time. So rounding up in terms of your capability expectations, that's really important. I tend to see a gravitation towards existing personal relationships or referral from a friend, and that'll get you to a certain point, but then you really need the real depth of experience that you probably need to search for in the broader market. Friends and family recruiting will probably only take you to 25 or so employees until it gets pretty thin or pretty remote. So thinking about that player coach profile is really important. I also talk a little bit about spans and layers, which without a whiteboard to draw it out on, I'll try to do it verbally. It's the idea of how many direct reports is it realistic for somebody to manage, and how many layers are there from the CEO or leader of the company to the front line. So how many managers managing managers might you have? And every one of those layers creates an opportunity for a major communication gap from misalignment. Their distance is created with every layer. So I've seen some organizations stack managers on top of each other, one on top of one, because they're trying to recruit somebody, and so they make it a managerial role. I've seen other organizations crow so proudly, we're a flat organization. Well, what that means is your CEO has 29 direct reports and is paying no attention to any of them. Or you have some sort of informal hierarchy that's developed that your leadership isn't really in control of. So just keeping an eye on spans and layers, and once again, applying critical thinking, where if you have a group of inside salespeople that are doing similar work under one roof with very clear and objective metrics and objectives, you can probably manage quite a few of them. Call it 12, 15, maybe even 20. But if you have one person doing finance in Bangalore and somebody doing marketing in Vancouver and somebody else who is doing a very technical, software engineering role in Austin, Texas, and they're all over the world in different time zones in very different types of roles, you probably can't manage as many of them. So that might be 4, 5, or 6. And so apply that to a CEO who manages different disciplines versus a department head or a team leader. And so just think about your spans and layers and try to make your growth make sense as you fill out your organization. So those are a few key tips. And back to prioritization, you can move 30 things an inch, or you can move 3 things a mile. And in startup land, where you're typically burning cash, you need to move fast. And so that means identify what those few key priorities are. Other stuff will get done, but it's like the big rocks concept from Franklin Covey. You identify those big rocks, and all the little pebbles and the gravels can fill in around it.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm going to the lovely term you're using, which is spans and layers. So spans obviously means that you have a high, spanning a range of different responsibilities, correct? And layers is
Yeah, layers would be how many layers of management.
You go down.
Yep. And span is span of control. Yep. So if you have 7 direct reports, your span is 7.
Yep.
If you have 5 direct reports, your span is 5.
Yep. Okay, so in the last 18 months, we've had a black swan event which has challenged everyone,
Mm,
both personally and business wise. And we've moved from companies that were all sitting in the same office, essentially turning up 9 to 5, doing the commute. It doesn't matter whether you're a startup in Silicon Valley or you're in Sydney, it really doesn't matter. Now we have to manage both a company that's in one location, because there are a few companies all going back to the office, and there's those that are actually a hybrid environment. Some are remote, or they mix it up. It's 3 days in the office and it's 2 days working remotely. Then there's businesses that are totally remote. So there's some, and I've been a remote company basically ever since. I've never had anyone working in the same office as me. I've got my editor lives in Sydney, so that we can catch up physically. But then I've got my marketing manager, he's in Hungary. Then I've got my video editor and marketing assistant, and they're in the Philippines. So, but I've found that tools have been a fabulous, technology tools that have made a huge difference. And just one tool I've found has made a huge difference. That one we're using at the moment, we started about 12, 14 months ago, is Trello, which is a collaboration tool, which, look, it's changed my life. But changed, made us much more efficient, and gave us much more visibility. So in terms of scaling companies, how important do you believe tools are, and also what are some of the top tools you've found to be incredibly effective?
oh,
So
great.
two questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So how important are tools? Absolutely essential. It's a necessary requirement for the job. We're not in a factory stamping out widgets. We're generally either creating code or creating ideas. And so we need our Microsoft Word and our PowerPoint, and we need our email. But so much work happens via collaboration and teamwork that those sorts of collaboration tools are essential. So video, like Zoom video, and there are others. There are other platforms out there, but Zoom seems almost ubiquitous at this point. Dropbox has become an essential tool for me. I run my executive education program using Dropbox with the readings and homework assignments all on it. Slack is a wonderful communication medium. It's not all things to all people, though. I find that Slack, people are trying to stretch it in directions where it can be awkward. I find that an instant messaging tool can be incredibly valuable and almost seems underutilized nowadays. I really miss the little IM chat windows that could pop up, and people don't use that as much as they could or should. Yeah, those tools are a few. One of my favorites is Calendly.
Yes.
That allows, that's at the bottom of my email signature, and that allows people to book time on my calendar and immediately sets them up with a Zoom video, and boy, that saves me dozens of hours every month back and forth scheduling.
Yeah. Well, we organise this via Calendly. I haven't got I actually have integrated with Zoom, but I'm not using it that way. Part of the challenge I sometimes find is, I actually have set it up so Calendly sets a time that we can choose that works for both of us. So Calendly's been a great tool. The other tool I've also found saved us both a lot of disk storage space as well is Google Drive. Just to be able to share content with everyone easily, Google Drive has been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. I feel like I didn't mention that because it's almost assumed at this point. It's like saying a keyboard.
Yeah.
Of course you need Google Drive. Yeah, that's one of those core items.
It's like saying you need a book.
Right.
Oh yeah, you need a phone. Okay, I know.
A computer, right?
Yeah, that's right. You need a
Right.
computer. Oh, of course you
Yeah,
need
so
a computer.
these tools are just really essential in any office environment. I mean, heck, even if you're on different floors, you might as well be in different countries in some cases, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
who's actually getting up and walking over to people's desks in an office environment. It doesn't happen that often. Most of your work is still at your desk in front of your computer. And so all these tools, have value in an in-person environment as well, but they're absolutely essential in a distributed environment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The other thing I wanted to ask you was with remote work and company culture and scaling organisations, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges for a remote work from a psychology point of view, organisation point of view, HR that you specialise in? What do you see some of the big challenges with remote work and how can you overcome them?
Yeah. Well, first, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of interest in, I need to frame that in a non-judgmental way, in the stress level that's being created by remote work, people working more time. There's no commute, but you're working longer hours, and people are getting Zoom fatigue, and there's a lot going on right now, right? COVID, pandemic, people are sick, people have lost loved ones, kids are not yet fully back to normal school, and boy, summer's around the corner, where I won't even have school to turn to. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old who are struggling to learn how to read in this environment. So there is, let's first frame, there's a lot going on. And I think that mental health focus is getting a lot of attention. And so that is a factor in the world of remote work. Now, how relevant will that ultimately be? I'm not sure. There's stress in the work world. Once we get the pandemic and COVID largely behind us, I think there will be a normalization, and kids back in school, and hopefully people not dying from this dread disease. But in a remote and distributed environment, I think this mental health aspect will be something that could be attended to, but it won't be on the top 3 list. I think number 1, 2, and 3 will be productivity.
Yep.
You still need to attract and retain good workers, and there are some tremendous advantages to this new distributed world. Employers, instead of looking down the block or within an hour commute of their office, they can look around the world for workers. So your talent pools have vastly opened up. For workers, you don't need to move to a high cost, high tax, small quarters, high density city to get a good job. You can stay in your little hometown, and your parents can help raise your kids. You can live a different life than you could as a worker. So I think there will be a decentralization away from cities. Employers will need to make some tough choices. Employers will need to decide if they want to force people back into the office. They may have trouble attracting and retaining good talent. So there will be this pull from workers, where it's still a talent-led market. The candidates, the employees still, I would argue, have more power than the employers today. There's such competition for talent that the employees, I think, will drive that many of them will want to work from home, and employers will be forced to offer that, or struggle that much more mightily to fill their jobs. So I think there will be some. I think this distributed work environment is here to stay, and employers are going to need to figure out how to deal with that. And that means they're going to need to figure out how to communicate clearly what people should be working on, and understand with more confidence whether people are on track or off track, or how they're doing. The classic management by walking around isn't possible anymore. So how do you do that? So I think there will be more attention on performance management, productivity, feedback in this distributed environment. And there are a bunch of technology tools out there that can help. but I don't think we've really cracked the code. There isn't the killer app that I'm
Yeah.
aware of yet.
Yeah, it's a very interesting area. I interviewed Liam Martin from Canada recently, and he runs a software as a service company called Time Doctor, which actually is a remote management tool.
Hmm.
And guess what? He's gone from about 45 employees to 175 employees in the last 12 months. And it can measure people's mental health almost, or even predict when people are going to leave, because it's got AI built into it as well as machine learning. It was a fascinating conversation with him. So, Canadian entrepreneur with a that is doing some fantastic stuff. And yeah, because there's so many tools out there. It's like, okay, what tool do I use? Which one's going to be effective? And managing remote workers, so you make sure that their mental health is still good, that they are productive, is really, really important. So I'm aware of your time, and I just need to make sure that you get to your next gig. And is there anything you'd like to share with us before we finish up? And then we need to know how people can discover you and get in touch with you if we need.
Yeah, well, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I guess tying it back to the book, which will be published by Columbia University Business School, gets released in July. Scaling for Success. 3 big takeaways: have a plan, master the basics, and context is more important than content. And we have lots of tools and templates and diagrams and stories and academic references and practical stories all captured in that book that flesh it out around, how a high growth leader, whether you're a HR leader or a CEO, can be more successful in scaling your organization. Check that out. And back to our conversation around remote work. I think it's here to stay. It's not remote, it's distributed, which means there may not be a central hub anymore. It could be fully distributed. And that's probably the big opportunity in the world, and maybe in the world of technology, is how do we manage in a distributed environment? How do we manage productivity better? And I might point back to the leaders and say, be really, really clear with what your priorities are. That's a good place to start before you go acquire some new software subscription.
Okay. Thanks for that. I think it's a great tip and 3 great points there. So how do they contact you, Andrew, if they wanted some help to scaling their business? What's the best place to contact you?
Yeah, I have a website, Series B, as in boy, Series B Consulting. That's a reference to venture capital rounds of funding. At Series B, second round of institutional funding, things start to get interesting. You're typically 50 plus employees. You've got a product in the marketplace, and you have a couple layers of management, and stuff starts to break. So that's when I can often be helpful in advising a CEO, or they're hiring their first HR leader. And I do a lot of mentoring with first-time HR leaders. And so I have a blog, and have been fortunate enough to do a number of podcasts like this, and just try to share some ideas and help people stub their toe fewer times than I did through my 25 years of doing this.
Well, I look forward to seeing the book. The book's coming out when? May?
July.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I read May somewhere, so obviously
Well, it's May now. I wish it came out in May. It's been a long project in the making, but really excited for it.
Yeah. Well, books are a major project, and congratulations on getting it written. I've written a book before, and got a new book in the wings. It's quite a process, and you need good editors to help get rid of the stuff. The words you write that they don't think's relevant. So I'm sure you had one of those, but yeah. So thank you, Andrew, for your time. Great to chat, and I look forward to catching up when the world's settled down a bit. The black swan becomes a white swan, and we can travel again. I actually went to New Zealand last week, and so my first international trip in 18 months. So I was quite excited, really.
But that's great. Well, I'll come up with an excuse to get to Sydney.
Okay. All right, it's a beautiful spot, just like San Francisco is, and look forward to that. Thanks, Andrew. It's been an absolute pleasure.